Alright everyone, time for round 3. I lost the die roll, which is already quite bad with Affinity, I'm not gonna lie. In addition, I don't have any lands, so I could run out Memnite Welding Jar on turn 1. And if I ever draw a land, I can actually Springleaf Drum out my remaining cards. And if I draw a Mox Opal, I could actually go absolutely crazy. However, there aren't too many mana sources in this deck, so yeah, let's see. I have exactly 16 lands and 4 Mox Opals, so there's just 20 cards that I want to draw with this hand, which means that I have a little better than a 1 in 3 shot. Even on the draw, that's just not good enough. So even though I like my Memnites, Seal Overseer's power is really that you have to get it down early, so I will mulligan to 6. Alright, this looks almost like the first hand, but horrible, so yeah, I'm not gonna go down to 4. I think that's generally not a good idea. I am, however, aware that this hand is not really great, so I'm expecting... Oh, interesting. I really like this matchup. I would love to have a better hand than the one I have. I think that Affinity is heavily favored against Hexproof, and there's a couple of reasons for that. You have the Infect kill, you have Arcbound Ravager, which is great, you have Edge Champion, which is great, and overall what the Hexproof deck does is oftentimes just not very threatening, as weird as that sounds. It does create a huge problem for fair decks that can't do anything about this growing monster there, but Affinity is pretty well equipped to actually beat it. Now I have a problem, because Spirit Mantle does give this protection from creatures and puts on a real clock, but still I was feeling quite well up until this point. So, and nothing is lost here, because I still have the Inkmoth Nexus, so I can try to kill my opponent with poison, which is kind of difficult given that this guy has reach. So I probably have to threaten the poison kill but don't show it to my opponent, and make my opponent overextend with his Bogle while still somehow getting through with the Inkmoth Nexus. The problem is that if this stays back, I'm never getting through. So Inkmoth Nexus alone isn't going to win me the game. What I could do is just cast Arcbound Ravager. Now, Edge Champion would be the better card, but I want to start dealing poison damage, and Arcbound Ravager synergizes better with the Steel Overseer activation. So I actually get in for damage here, and I have no reason to sacrifice Arcbound Ravager at this stage, because I want to diversify my threat base, and I know that one large Inkmoth Nexus isn't going to win me the game on its own. And now I think I've probably lost. +3/+3, First Strike, Vigilance, Lifelink, Protection from creatures, and Reach. Now, this is pretty much the ideal combination of cards that my opponent needs, and it's really the Spider Umbra that puts the icing on the cake. The Spider Umbra and the fact that I'm just not going to raise the Daybreak Coronet. I could still win if I draw a second Inkmoth Nexus this turn exactly. Alright, Mox Opal is not it. So yeah, I'm never dealing 24 with the Ravager, and this can just block Inkmoth Nexus. I could, of course, see if my opponent knows that he can block with the Spider Umbra, but I would have to guess that that's the case. So next time my opponent has 30 life, and I could just attack with everything I have, potentially threatening a kill on all fronts. Inkmoth Nexus has to be blocked. I have the second Mox Opal either this turn or next turn. The one thing I'm risking here by waiting one more turn is that I'm just dying. if my opponent gives this another +3/+3. But if I just attack with Inkmoth Nexus this turn, I think my opponent just blocks and wins the game. So I'm gonna try this instead. Cast Edge Champion. Eat the Mox Opal. Cast the Mox Opal. And this is going to have 4 counters. This is already a 2/2. So, and I can still sacrifice more creatures into this. So I think making Inkmoth Nexus lethal is not my highest priority, but getting plating into play is probably more important. And like I said, I might just be dead here this turn, and then I can still go for it. Even though I don't see how I can ever deal 30 damage out of nowhere. The problem with the 2 Mox Opal is that you can never instant speed equip Cranial Plating. That's just not going to work. And I'm probably just dead. Maybe a Rancor. Although that wouldn't be lethal. Ethereal Armor. Another Spider Umbra. Alright, 7/7. Looks like I'm alive, at least. The thing about this is, if it didn't have protection from creatures, I could block with random creatures and sacrifice them to Ravager. Or block with Edge Champion and nothing would happen, because it doesn't have Trample right now. Sadly, it's all not the case. Signal Pest. Alright. Inkmoth Nexus. Let's just make sure 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So Inkmoth Nexus is definitely lethal. Steel Overseer is better off attacking rather than holding back. So I can actually just equip it. Well, I can actually just equip Edge Champion. I think that's probably a bit smarter. Now I'm attacking with everything. And my opponent just has to make the correct block, and then I have no way of dealing enough damage. The way Edge Champion, the way Cranial Plating and Arcburn Ravager work together is that you never get to deal extra damage with your Arcburn Ravager, basically. So one thing I'm going to show you here as well is how to deny the life gain, which is important, but not really dealing enough damage here. 18 points is not enough. So I'll let my opponent kill me here. Bit too much looking at the combination of cards. But I do have my 2 Spell Skites to bring in, and like I said, I like the matchup. It's usually quite an interactive game, or a surprisingly interactive game, I should say. I mean, it is hexproof after all, so alright, you got it. So what's interesting is the Galvanic Blast is not completely horrible, because it does kill the Umbra Mystic, is that what it's called? The 2 mana 0/2 that grows and gives my opponent cards. So I kind of like Galvanic Blast. The question is only if you have space for it. Now Whip Flare, I'm basically always running. Sometimes they just have the draw with too many hexproof guys, and then you can just rip flare their board. Thoughtseize I also like. Edge Champion is a clear inclusion, and Spellskite is of course pretty much the best you can have. I don't think that Spell Pierce is good enough, and yeah, I don't know if I will have space for Galvanic Blast or if I want other cards instead. So Welding Jar is actually funny because it keeps Spellskite alive, but usually these decks don't even try to kill Spellskite. And if they do, it's Path to Exile. So Welding Jar doesn't do it. Now Memnite only attacks on the ground, which is horrible, and it is good at chump blocking though, which is important with the Arcbound Ravager. The card I like least is Massive Ethereum, because on the ground, your opponents will just have too much stuff going on. Now, I could see taking out just all the Galvanic Blasts as a way to circumvent what they are doing. And one thing I could do is also to drop Thoughtcast, because the games are so brutal that you kind of have to have everything working in your favor. The alternative sideboard plan is to take out the Memnites completely, basically conceding the battle on the ground, going into the air, and then you have a few more ways to interact with what they're doing. I'm on the play, and like I said, I feel quite confident in the matchup. I could actually see myself swapping around the Thoughtseize and the Galvanic Blast from time to time, but I don't want to draw too many Thoughtcasts. The cards that I want to see are the Tool Spellskite, but I also want to see them early. So drawing too many of the Thoughtcasts is a danger, but Galvanic Blast helps me win the game, and it allows me to kill the stupid O2. So I think just leaving one of the Thoughtcasts out here is a good line. And hopefully the lack of Memnites is not going to be a problem. Alright, this hand is interesting. I need to basically draw any mana source, and then I have a Spellskite. I'm not going to mulligan this hand. It is somewhat similar to the zero lander that I had, but this time, once I draw a mana source, I will have Spellskite. And I'm not even without doing anything here. So alright, Thoughtcast is horrible. My opponent mulligan to 5 and looks to have a horrible hand as well. Wow, these draw steps. And there we go. So now I'm actually going to run out Steel Overseer first, so that if my opponent has a path to exile, he's kind of forced to use it on the Overseer. And then the Spellskite will win the game. Alright, it looks like my deck, even though it's very inconsistent, is still a lot more consistent than what my opponent is doing here. I'm just going into turbo mode, as this is really just a question of one more turn. Don't think there's an artifact hate for 2 mana that kills me here. Of course, Spirit Dancer is the card that I talked about, and if possible, I don't want to even show my opponent any of the solutions that I have for it. And I think I'm just attacking for lethal here with all the creatures that I have. So I didn't really want to do that. Let's undo. I wanted to animate that. Activate Steel Overseer. And yeah, that's more than lethal because I have the Arcbound Ravager as well. I'll take it if my opponent doesn't play lands. Thankfully, I drew the one land that I needed to draw. So I'm attacking for 8 damage, and the Arcbound Ravager is a 4/3, but only with 3 counters, so I need to sacrifice Darksteel Citadel to make it a lethal attack. And 6, 8 plus 4, yeah, that should be sufficient. I still have the Galvanic Blast if I miscount or misclick, but like I said, if possible, I don't want to show my opponent any of the cards that I had to beat him. So yeah, didn't really learn anything this game. Didn't see any sideboard hate. Of course, there could be Stony Silences waiting for me, but it's kind of difficult to sideboard more than the 2 Thoughtseizes to beat Stony Silence. Thoughtseize is already a liability with the black mana that you need to cast it, so yeah, I like the Whip Flare. Sometimes it can just blow your opponent out completely. I also think that the plan of going to the air is very reasonable. And Thoughtcast does give me the option of recovering from mulligans and to draw into the cards that I need. So I'm going to keep it like this, and yeah, see how this works out. Yeah, this is a great hand. Opponent mulligans to 6. I'm not gonna mulligan. And now it's basically a turn 2 Spellskite, or maybe even a turn 2 Steel Overseer followed by a Spellskite, depending on how quickly my opponent gets out of the gates here. So no creature on turn 1. Probably the O2 now. No, it's actually Stony Silence. Alright. So things just got a bit more interesting. Steel Overseer and Spellskite are not going to do anything for me. And of course the Mox Opals aren't working either. So I can play a random 1/1 or a random 0/4, or I can start attacking with Inkmoth Nexus. And I think the plan is to attack with Inkmoth Nexus now. I'm always confused which of these is summoning 6, so I'm actually gonna hover my mouse above it. This one should be the one that's summoning 6. Yeah, and it is, but I always make sure like this. Alright, this is the Stony Silence that I thought I wasn't going to try to beat, and you can see why. I had one turn to cast Vault Scourge, and I wouldn't have Glimmer Voided into Thoughtseize just to beat Stony Silence, so... my opponent... Quite an interesting draw here. This is something that happens when you play Affinity. Your opponents will keep hands with only Stony Silence, and that's clearly not sufficient to win. Especially if my draw is more explosive, I might actually have a pretty huge board here at this point. So no Path to Exile is also good news, and I have no reason to play my island or the Moxes, so I'm just gonna pass the turn here. Of course the triple Inkmoth Nexus draw is also quite potent. Sadly no signal passed. Alright, now we get started. Glade Clover Scout and Ethereal Armor. So I can try to gain a bit more life, and I can also try to play some chump blockers, but Vault Scourge is better off attacking. And I think I should wait at least one more turn before playing chump blockers here. The longer I wait with the chump blockers, the more damage they prevent. On the other hand, at some point there's going to be evasiveness or trample or stuff like that going on. Oh no, my opponent found a Path to Exile. That's really bad. So... well, it's actually not horrible because I have 2 Nexus left, and I wouldn't have been remotely close to activating 3. Alright, Daybreak Coronet and Spider Umbra. So this is how I lose, because now Inkmoth Nexus is able to be blocked, and my chump blocking isn't going to get me anywhere. So yeah, at this stage, I'm just not really drawing life anymore. Can run out a Mox Opal just to protect the Glimmer Void. But this is probably it. This is probably the combination of cards that my opponent needed to assemble to beat me. Apart from the fact that it's just a 9/9 that's killing me pretty handily. It is kind of frustrating to play against Stony Silence because you look at all these sweet cards in your hand and you know that they just aren't doing anything. But like I said, I don't think there's a reasonable way to play around it. You can play a Ray of Revelation in your sideboard if you want to do that, and in this matchup you would actually be happy to bring it in as well. But then you are always thinking about Stony Silence, and you're going to be wanting to bring in Ray of Revelation in matchups where you don't really want to do it. Think about the Splinter Twin matchups, for example. If you bring in the Ray of Revelation, and then your opponent is just basically playing control, you'll suddenly have a dead card, and dead cards, especially dead colored cards, is not something that Affinity wants to draw. Now, I didn't block here because it would have only delayed the inevitable. I can't beat this creature. All my deck is basically not life, the opposite of life. So I think sideboarding with Affinity is really difficult. I'm not 100% on these decisions either. It's really just what I have been doing when I played a lot after the Pro Tour, after Christian Seibold made the top 8. I used this deck to collect qualifier points on Magic Online, and the metagame has shifted a little bit, but this is pretty much what I remember. I've seen a lot of blue-red decks. There used to be a lot of Tron, which is kind of a bad matchup. So the way I see it is that the blue-red decks and Hexproof, for example, you can usually beat. The Tron deck is difficult, not because of Tron and Karn and Wormcoil Engine, but simply because they will have Pyroclasms, and they will be bringing in Nature's Claims as well. And these are the cards that you have to be afraid of. And then there is Pod, which for some reason I never beat, which is kind of my biggest problem with the deck. Sometimes you get lucky with Inkmoth Nexus, but they have flying blockers and a very fast clock and artifact hate. So the matchup against Pod, in my opinion, is the main problem of Affinity in Modern. So everything else you can beat, but you should definitely know what you're doing if you're playing against blue-red and blue-red-green. I think I showed you in round 1 and 2, I showed you some of the things that you have to be aware of, but I also showed you 4 or 5 things that I could have done better, or where I wasn't paying full attention, where my sideboarding was off, where I exposed myself to Electrolyze. So there's just, like in Modern, like with any decks, there's so much stuff to do wrong, and that's pretty much where you will get your edge when you play PDQs. One last thing about Affinity is, yes, it does mulligan a lot, but it does have great mana and 4 Thoughtcast, which are, in my opinion, absolutely vital. I wouldn't cut a single one. I sometimes board them out, but I would always run 4 in this deck. I would cut more expensive cards much earlier. And yeah, then when you look at your hand, at your starting hand, it's not the question, are you able to cast your spells, or are you able to play some lands and cast some creatures? No, the question is, do I have a winning game plan? And that usually involves Steel Overseer, Arcbound Ravager, Cranial Plating, maybe Master of Ethereum, but that's a bit more expensive. And then sometimes you can compensate with strong support cards or with Thoughtcasts. If you have a Mox Opal Thoughtcast draw, I'm also almost never mulliganing. Mox Opal is one of the most powerful cards in the deck by far. And Inkmoth Nexus is my favorite card in the deck because it's just absurdly good. All right. I hope you like this venture into Modern. I'm Simon Goertzen, recording this for StarCityGames.com. Let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions. Let me know what you want to see next, and I'll be back. Bye-bye.